The voicemail arrived at 2:14 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, 3 hours after I'd called my mother from Mercy General Hospital in tears. "Claudia, honey, you need to understand our position. Tyler's wedding is this Saturday, and we've already committed $45,000. Your gallbladder surgery will have to wait until next week. Tyler only gets married once." I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I was lying in a hospital bed with acute cholangitis, a life-threatening infection that my surgeon, Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, said required emergency surgery within 48 hours, or I could die from septic shock. But my family had already bought their designer outfits for my brother's extravagant wedding to Victoria Ashworth, daughter of Denver's most prominent real estate dynasty. The flowers were ordered from the exclusive botanical gardens. The string quartet had been flown in from New York. And me? I was just Claudia Thompson, 28 years old, threatening to ruin their perfect weekend by having a medical emergency. My name is Claudia Thompson, and what happened next will forever change how you think about family loyalty and the price of always coming second. Because sometimes, when the people who are supposed to love you most choose a party over your life, fate has a way of evening the score in ways no one could ever imagine. The pain had started on Monday morning while I was teaching my third grade class at Riverside Elementary in Aurora, Colorado. At first, it felt like indigestion from the coffee shop sandwich I'd grabbed for breakfast. Teachers don't get long lunch breaks, and my salary of $42,000 a year meant I often skipped proper meals to save money. But by noon, the pain had intensified to something I'd never experienced before. Sharp, stabbing sensations under my right ribcage that made it difficult to breathe, let alone stand in front of 28 curious 8-year-olds trying to learn multiplication tables. "Miss Thompson, are you okay?" Little Emma Peterson had asked during reading time. "You look really pale." I'd managed to finish the school day, but by 3:30 p.m., when the last bus pulled away, I was doubled over in the empty hallway, my vision blurring from the intensity of the pain. The school nurse, Mrs. Patricia Valdez, found me there 20 minutes later, clutching the water fountain and trying not to vomit. "Claudia, we need to get you to a hospital right now," she said, already reaching for her car keys. "This isn't normal stomach pain." The drive to Mercy General took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Every bump in the road sent waves of agony through my abdomen. Mrs. Valdez kept glancing at me in the passenger seat, her worried expression reflecting my own fear. I'd never been seriously ill before, never spent a night in a hospital, never faced anything more serious than the occasional flu or sprained ankle from my weekend hiking trips in the Rocky Mountains. The emergency room was busy with the usual Monday afternoon crowd. Construction workers with injuries, elderly patients with chest pains, children with broken bones from playground accidents. I sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes, each minute stretching endlessly as the pain continued to worsen. When they finally called my name, I could barely walk to the triage station. "On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your pain?" asked the triage nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. 8, maybe 9, I whispered, afraid that speaking louder would somehow make the pain worse. Within minutes, I was being wheeled into an examination room where Dr. Jennifer Matthews, the emergency physician on duty, began a series of tests that would reveal the severity of my condition. Blood draws, urine samples, and an ultrasound that showed something was seriously wrong with my gallbladder. "Claudia, your white blood cell count is extremely elevated, and the ultrasound shows significant inflammation," Dr. Matthews explained, her professional demeanor unable to completely mask her concern. "We're going to need to run some additional tests and get you admitted immediately." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and mounting anxiety. More blood tests, a CT scan, consultations with specialists who spoke in medical terminology I couldn't fully understand. By Tuesday morning, I had been transferred to the surgical ward under the care of Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, one of the hospital's most experienced general surgeons. Dr. Rodriguez was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the confident manner of someone who had performed thousands of surgical procedures. When she sat beside my hospital bed Tuesday afternoon with my test results, her expression was grave. "Claudia, you have acute cholangitis, which is a serious infection of your bile ducts. Your gallbladder is severely inflamed and the infection is spreading. We need to perform emergency surgery to remove your gallbladder and clear the infection before it progresses to septic shock." The words hit me like a physical blow. Surgery, emergency surgery. The possibility of septic shock, which I knew from medical shows on television was potentially fatal. "How serious is this, Dr. Rodriguez? I mean, what happens if we wait?" She leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine directly. "Claudia, I need you to understand that this cannot wait. Cholangitis can progress very rapidly. If we don't operate within the next 48 hours, the infection could spread to your bloodstream, causing organ failure. We're talking about a life-threatening situation." My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone to call my family. My first instinct was to call my principal, Mr. Davidson, to arrange for substitute coverage for the rest of the week. He immediately told me not to worry about anything except getting better, and that the school would handle all the arrangements. My second call was to my best friend from college, Rachel Morrison, who lived in Seattle. Despite the distance, Rachel had been my closest confidant for the past 6 years. She started crying before I even finished explaining the situation and promised to look into flights to Denver immediately. My third call was to my mother, Patricia Thompson, at the real estate office where she worked as an administrative assistant. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation, fighting back tears as I described the pain, the diagnosis, and the urgent need for surgery. "Mom, I'm scared. They're saying I need emergency surgery this week, or the infection could kill me." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had a strange quality, as if she was calculating something in her head. "Oh my goodness, Claudia. This is terrible timing. Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'What can we do to help?' Not, 'We'll be right there.' Just the immediate concern about timing, as if my medical emergency was primarily an inconvenience to be managed. 'Mom, I could die if I don't have this surgery.' Well, surely they can wait until next week. Tyler's wedding is this Saturday, and we've been planning this for over a year. Victoria's family has invited 300 people, including the mayor and half the city council. This is the most important day of Tyler's life." The casual dismissal in her voice made my stomach clench even tighter than the medical condition already was. Tyler's wedding to Victoria Ashworth was indeed the social event my parents had been building toward for months. Victoria came from one of Denver's oldest and wealthiest families, owners of Ashworth Properties, which had developed half the luxury condominiums in the city. Her father, Richard Ashworth, sat on the boards of 3 major Colorado corporations. Her mother, Catherine Ashworth, chaired the Denver Museum of Art's fundraising committee. For my parents, Richard and Patricia Thompson, this wasn't just their son's wedding. It was their entry into Denver's social elite, their chance to finally be somebody important in a city where they'd always been middle-class outsiders looking in. "Mom, the doctor says waiting could kill me. This isn't something I can reschedule." "Claudia, you have to try to understand our position. We've already put deposits down with the caterers, the florists, the musicians. Your father took vacation time from the insurance company. We've booked hotel rooms for out-of-town guests. Victoria's grandmother is flying in from Palm Beach specifically for this weekend." I spent the next 20 minutes trying to explain medical concepts I barely understood myself, reading directly from the information sheets Dr. Rodriguez had given me about cholangitis, septic shock, and the risks of delaying treatment. But every medical fact I presented was met with skepticism or attempts to minimize the urgency. "These doctors always try to scare people into unnecessary procedures," Mom said. "Your cousin Janet had gallbladder problems last year, and her doctor Said it was urgent too, but she waited 3 weeks and was fine. The comparison to my cousin's completely different medical situation showed how little my mother understood or cared to understand about my specific condition. But what hurt more was the underlying message. Tyler's wedding was more important than my life. Mom, this isn't like Cousin Janet's situation. I have an active infection that could spread to my bloodstream. Well, can't they give you antibiotics or something to hold you over until next week? Surely there's something they can do that doesn't involve major surgery right before the most important weekend of our lives. Major surgery right before the most important weekend of their lives. Not my life. Their lives. The social climbing opportunity they'd been waiting for since Tyler started dating Victoria 2 years ago. The conversation ended with my mother promising to call me back after discussing the situation with my father. I lay in my hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, the IV line in my arm delivering antibiotics that Dr. Rodriguez hoped would slow the infection's progress, but wouldn't cure it without surgical intervention. My phone rang an hour later. This time it was my father, Robert Thompson, calling from his office at Mountain States Insurance, where he worked as a claims adjuster. Claudia, sweetheart, your mother filled me in on the situation. This is really putting us in a difficult spot. Putting them in a difficult spot. My potentially fatal medical condition was primarily a logistical challenge for their social calendar. Dad, I might die if I don't have this surgery. Now, don't be dramatic. These doctors always present worst-case scenarios to cover themselves legally. I deal with medical claims every day at work. I know how these things work. They probably just want to get you into surgery quickly to maximize their billing. The irony of my father, who worked in insurance and processed medical claims, dismissing the urgency of my condition, wasn't lost on me. He saw medical fraud in his work, so he assumed all medical urgency was fraudulent. Dad, Dr. Rodriguez is the head of general surgery at Mercy General. She's not trying to scam me. Look, here's what we'll do. I'll call my contact at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, Dr. Kevin Sullivan. He owes me a favor from a claim I helped him with last year. I'll have him look at your test results and give us a real timeline, not this rush job nonsense. There. Wasn't time for second opinions. Dr. Rodriguez had been clear about the 48-hour window, and we were already 18 hours into it. But my father was more concerned with proving that medical professionals were trying to manipulate his daughter than with accepting that his daughter might actually be in mortal danger. The surgery is scheduled for Friday morning, Dad. That's the last safe day according to Dr. Rodriguez. Friday morning is when we're supposed to be at the final wedding rehearsal. The Ashworth family has planned a brunch afterward at the country club. Victoria's parents specifically asked us to be there early to help with last-minute coordination, the C. Wedding rehearsal brunch was more important than my surgery. The social obligations to virtual strangers were taking priority over their daughter's life. Dad, I could be dead by Sunday if I don't have this surgery Friday. Claudia, you're catastrophizing. If it was really that dangerous, they would have rushed you into surgery immediately on Monday night. The fact that they're willing to wait until Friday proves it's not as urgent as they're claiming. My father's insurance industry logic completely ignored the medical reality that Dr. Rodriguez had carefully explained. The 48-hour window was based on the progression of the infection, not on hospital scheduling convenience. But he had convinced himself that medical urgency was a billing strategy rather than a life-saving necessity. My final call Tuesday night was to my brother Tyler, hoping that maybe he would have more perspective than our parents. Tyler was 30, years old, 2 years older than me, and had always been the golden child in our family. Straight-A student, varsity football captain, business degree from the University of Colorado, and now a successful commercial real estate broker working for the same company as Victoria's father. Claudia, I'm so sorry you're going through this, Tyler said when I explained the situation. But you have to understand what you're asking me to do. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe Tyler would be the voice of reason, the family member who would prioritize my health over a party. The Ashworth family has been planning this wedding for 18 months. Victoria's mother has called in favors from every vendor in Denver. We've got guests flying in from New York, California, and Florida. Richard Ashworth's business partners are coming. This isn't just a wedding, Claudia. This is my future. My future versus his future. My life versus his career advancement. Tyler, I might die if I don't have surgery Friday. Come on, don't be so dramatic. You've always been prone to worst-case thinking. Remember when you thought you'd failed your teaching certification exam and it turned out you got one of the highest scores in Colorado? Tyler was rewriting history. The teaching certification anxiety had been his experience, not mine. But in his mind, all family experiences were interchangeable as long as they supported his current argument that I was being unnecessarily dramatic. This is different, Tyler. I have an active infection that could cause organ failure. Look, I talked to Victoria about this, and her cousin is a medical student at Johns Hopkins. She says gallbladder problems are usually not as urgent as doctors claim. They probably just want to get you into surgery quickly because it's more profitable than treating you conservatively. Victoria's cousin, a medical student, was being presented as more qualified than Dr. Rodriguez, who had been performing abdominal surgery for over 20 years. Tyler and Victoria had convinced themselves that medical experts were less trustworthy than a second-year medical student who had never even examined me. Tyler, Dr. Rodriguez showed me the CT scan. My gallbladder is severely inflamed, and the infection is spreading. Claudia, here's the thing. Victoria and I think you might be having some kind of psychological response to the wedding, like maybe subconsciously you're upset about not being the center of attention, so you're creating a medical crisis. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. My brother believed I had somehow given myself a life-threatening infection because I was jealous of his wedding. You think I'm faking cholangitis because I'm envious of your marriage? Not faking, but maybe exaggerating the symptoms. Victoria's aunt is a therapist, and she says family members sometimes develop psychosomatic illnesses during major family celebrations when they feel left out. Tyler and Victoria had psychoanalyzed my infection. Based on the expertise of Victoria's aunt, they had determined that my potentially fatal medical condition was actually a psychological manifestation of sibling rivalry. Tyler, I have blood test results showing a severe infection. I have CT scan images showing an inflamed gallbladder. Yeah, but doctors can misinterpret those things. Maybe the inflammation has been there for months and isn't actually dangerous. Maybe your blood work is just showing stress responses that look like infection markers. My brother, who had no medical training whatsoever, was confident that he could reinterpret laboratory results and diagnostic imaging better than trained medical professionals. Look, here's what we'll do, Tyler continued. Come to the wedding. Saturday. If you're still feeling bad afterward, Victoria's family knows some excellent physicians who take a more conservative approach to treatment. The Ashworth family has connections at National Jewish Health and University of Colorado Hospital. A more conservative approach to life-threatening infections. Tyler wanted me to risk dying from septic shock, so I wouldn't miss his networking opportunity disguised as a wedding. Tyler, if I wait until after your wedding, I might be dead. You're catastrophizing again, Claudia. You've always been prone to worst-case scenario thinking. Remember when you thought that parent complaint about your teaching methods was going to get you fired? And it turned out the principal supported you completely? Another memory that belonged to him, not me. But in Tyler's world, all experiences could be rewritten to support whatever point he was trying to make. That's when I finally understood what I was dealing with. I wasn't talking to family members who disagreed with my medical decisions. I wasn't talking to people who were weighing competing priorities. I was talking to people who simply didn't believe that my medical emergency was real. Despite blood tests, CT scans, and expert medical opinions, my family had decided that my life-threatening condition was either fake, exaggerated, psychological, or somehow my fault. They had made this choice because believing me would require them to make a sacrifice they weren't willing to make. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful. if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Tyler's wedding to Victoria Ashworth was more important than my life. Their social climbing aspirations were more important than my health. Their perfect weekend was more important than my survival. Wednesday morning, I called Dr. Rodriguez's office and confirmed the Friday morning surgery. "I'll be going through this alone," I told her nurse, Patricia Kim. "My family has other commitments." Nurse Kim was quiet for a moment before responding gently. "Claudia, that happens more often than you might think. Dr. Rodriguez is one of the best surgeons in Colorado. You're making the right choice, and we'll take excellent care of you." After hanging up, I sat in my hospital bed and felt something shift inside me. For 28 years, I had tried to earn my family's love and approval. I had accepted being second place to Tyler's achievements, rationalized their favoritism, and minimized my own needs to keep the peace. But this time, they weren't just hurting my feelings or damaging my self-esteem. This time, their rejection could cost me my life. And for the first time in my adult life, I realized I was done asking for their love. I was done trying to earn my place in a family that had already decided Tyler's social advancement was more valuable than my survival. Friday morning, I would have surgery to save my life. Saturday afternoon, they would celebrate Tyler's wedding, with money they'd spent without regard for anyone else's needs. And after that, we would all discover that some choices have consequences that extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined. Growing up in the Thompson household meant understanding your place in an invisible hierarchy that governed every family interaction. At the head of our modest ranch house in Thornton, Colorado, sat Dad in his worn leather recliner, remote control always within reach. Mom occupied the kitchen table where she sorted through real estate listings and planned social events that might elevate our family's standing. Tyler claimed the living room couch, homework spread across the coffee table, his athletic trophies gleaming on the mantelpiece behind him. And me? I did my schoolwork at the small desk in my bedroom, away from the family conversations that seemed to flow around me rather than include me. My parents, Robert and Patricia Thompson, had built their entire identity around the appearance of suburban success. Dad's job at Mountain States Insurance provided a steady middle-class income that afforded us a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage and annual vacations to places like Branson, Missouri, or the Grand Canyon. Mom's part-time work at Pinnacle Real Estate brought in enough extra money for her designer handbag collection and the country club membership she'd campaigned for since Tyler started high school. They weren't neglectful parents in the traditional sense. We had clean clothes, nutritious meals, and help with homework when we asked for it. But their version of love felt transactional, earned through achievements that reflected well on the Thompson family name. Every report card, every school play, every soccer game became an opportunity to demonstrate that Robert and Patricia Thompson had raised successful children who enhanced their social reputation. Tyler understood this dynamic instinctively from his earliest years. Golden-haired and naturally charming, he possessed the kind of easy athleticism that made coaches fight over him, and the academic aptitude that kept him on the honor roll without apparent effort. He played varsity football and baseball, served as student council president, and graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to the University of Colorado Boulder. Each milestone became a trophy in my parents' social arsenal. "Our son Tyler just broke the school record for rushing yards," Dad would announce at neighborhood barbecues. "Tyler's been accepted to the Business Honors program at CU," Mom would mention casually during church coffee hour. "Tyler landed an internship with Ashworth Properties," she'd share with anyone who would listen at the grocery store checkout line. Tyler was their golden ticket to respectability in a city where old Colorado families looked down on newcomers from Kansas, which is where my parents had moved from when Tyler was 6 and I was 4. We were perpetual outsiders trying to prove we belonged among people whose grandparents had founded mining companies and cattle ranches in the 1800s. I was the practice round, the first draft that helped them perfect their parenting strategy before Tyler came along. 2 years older than my brother, I somehow always felt like I was trailing behind in their estimation. I got good grades, but not great grades. I made varsity soccer, but didn't receive scholarship offers. I attended Metropolitan State University instead of a prestigious flagship campus. I became an elementary school teacher instead of pursuing a high-powered career in business or law. Claudia's doing well, my parents would say when neighbors asked about both their children. Well, not exceptionally, not impressively, just well. The verbal equivalent of a participation trophy, acknowledging my existence while quickly steering the conversation toward Tyler's latest accomplishment. The pattern established itself early and remained consistent throughout our childhood. When Tyler was 7 and I was 9, he accidentally broke Mom's china serving bowl while playing indoor hockey with a plastic stick. I was upstairs reading when it happened, but when Mom discovered the pieces, Tyler claimed he'd seen me playing with the hockey stick earlier. I was grounded from television for 2 weeks. Tyler received praise for being honest about what he witnessed. During our teenage years, I spent 3 months saving babysitting money to buy Mom a pearl bracelet for her 40th birthday. Tyler forgot about her birthday completely until the morning of, then grabbed $20 from Dad's wallet to buy a generic card at the drugstore. Mom wore my bracelet to one church service, then stored it in her jewelry box where it remained untouched. Tyler's drugstore card occupied a place of honor on her dresser for over a year. The message was always clear. Tyler's minimal effort carried more weight than my maximum effort. His successes reflected the quality of their parenting. My successes were pleasant surprises that didn't really count toward the family reputation. His failures were temporary setbacks or someone else's responsibility. My failures revealed character defects that required immediate correction. College amplified these dynamics exponentially. When Tyler graduated high school as valedictorian, with his full-ride scholarship, my parents threw a graduation party that included half the neighborhood, catered food from the expensive Italian restaurant downtown, and a brand-new pickup truck as a graduation gift. They personally drove him to Boulder for freshman orientation, staying overnight at a hotel to help him settle into the honors dormitory. When I graduated 2 years earlier with a 3.8 GPA and partial academic scholarship to Metropolitan State, Mom said, "Well, at least you got some scholarship money." They gave me $500 cash and told me to figure out the rest on my own. I worked 3 jobs during college, serving tables at a family restaurant near campus, tutoring struggling students in the writing center, and stocking shelves at a bookstore during evening hours. I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in elementary education and $15,000 in student loans. Tyler graduated with a business degree, 0 debt, study abroad experience in London, and a job offer from Ashworth Properties that Dad had helped arrange through networking connections he'd cultivated specifically for Tyler's benefit. After college, I moved into a small apartment in Aurora, 20 minutes from the elementary school where I'd been hired as a 3rd-grade teacher. I loved working with children, loved the moment when a struggling reader finally understood phonics patterns, loved creating bulletin boards that made learning feel magical for 8-year-olds who still believed in possibilities. But teaching salaries in Colorado barely covered rent, car payments, student loans, and basic living expenses. I shopped at thrift stores, cooked meals at home, and considered a movie ticket a luxury purchase I could afford maybe once a month. Tyler moved into a luxury apartment in downtown Denver's trendy Lodo district, bought a BMW with help from Dad as a co-signer, and began dating Victoria Ashworth, whose family owned half the commercial real estate between Denver and Colorado Springs. Suddenly, every family gathering revolved around Tyler and Victoria's relationship, their weekend trips to Aspen and Vail, their dinner parties with Denver's young professional elite, and Victoria's family connections to Colorado's business and political establishment. Victoria's father thinks Tyler has real potential in commercial development, Dad would announce during Sunday dinners at their house. Richard Ashworth doesn't take on just anyone as a protege. Victoria's mother invited us to the charity gala at the Denver Art Museum, Mom would add, as if she'd been granted an audience with royalty. Catherine Ashworth specifically asked me to help with the silent auction organization. Every conversation became an opportunity to name-drop the Ashworth family and highlight Tyler's success in winning Victoria's affections. My parents weren't just gaining a daughter-in-law, they were gaining access to Denver's social elite, the old money families who had previously ignored their existence. The engagement announcement was treated like a national holiday in the Thompson household. Mom called everyone in her contact list, including people she hadn't spoken to in years. Dad bought champagne that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. They immediately began planning their outfits for the engagement party, which was held at the Ashworth family's estate in Cherry Hills Village, one of Colorado's most exclusive zip codes. I was invited naturally, but my presence felt perfunctory. I wore a dress from Target and watched my parents network with people who casually mentioned their ski houses in Telluride and charitable foundations named after their grandparents. "This is our daughter Claudia," Mom would say when introductions were unavoidable. "She teaches elementary school." Then she would immediately pivot to Tyler's accomplishments in commercial real estate and his bright future with the Ashworth organization. The wedding planning consumed my parents' lives for the following 18 months. Every family dinner became a detailed discussion of venues, caterers, musicians, and guest lists. They were spending money they didn't actually have, but this was their chance to host an event that would permanently cement their place in Victoria's family's social circle. "We're thinking about the Broadmoor for the reception," Mom would announce during our Sunday dinners. Catherine Ashworth thinks the ballroom would be perfect, and she's offered to help with the vendor connections since they know the event coordinators personally. $45,000. That was the figure they mentioned repeatedly, always with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Dad had taken a second mortgage on the house. Mom was putting deposits on credit cards. They were mortgaging their financial future for one perfect day that would prove they belonged in the Ashworth family's world. Meanwhile, my own life was quietly becoming more difficult in ways I didn't initially connect to their wedding spending. The modest financial help they'd occasionally provided had completely disappeared. When my car needed new tires, they told me to shop around for better prices instead of offering assistance. When I mentioned struggling with my student loan payments, Mom suggested I find a summer tutoring job to supplement my income. The back pain had started in January, about 6 months before Tyler's scheduled June wedding. Initially, I attributed the discomfort to stress and poor ergonomics in my classroom. Elementary school teachers spend long hours on their feet, bending over small desks, lifting boxes of supplies, and maintaining energy levels that match those of energetic 8-year-olds. I started taking ibuprofen daily, switched to more supportive shoes, and tried sleeping in different positions to alleviate the morning stiffness. But by March, the pain had evolved into something more concerning. Sharp, stabbing sensations in my abdomen that came in waves, particularly after eating fatty foods or during stressful moments at school. I mentioned it during our weekly family dinners, but wedding planning had become all-consuming for my parents. "Mom, I'm having some really concerning stomach pain. I think I should see a doctor." "Probably just stress from work. You should try yoga like Victoria does. She swears by that hot yoga studio in Cherry Creek. Maybe you should take up something more active instead of just reading all the time." Every attempt to discuss my health was deflected or redirected toward wedding preparations or comparisons to Victoria's superior lifestyle choices. My parents were so completely absorbed in Tyler's upcoming marriage that my growing medical concerns barely registered as background noise in their consciousness. I started missing Sunday family dinners because sitting for extended periods had become unbearable. Mom's response was annoyance rather than concern. "You're missing too many family gatherings, Claudia." Victoria mentioned that she notices when family members don't prioritize spending time together. What if she says something to her parents about our family dynamics? Even my absence due to pain was somehow framed as a potential embarrassment. in front of the Ashworth family. My health problems were viewed primarily through the lens of how they might reflect poorly on the Thompsons' family image. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad worked for an insurance company, processing medical claims daily, but couldn't be bothered to take his daughter's medical concerns seriously. When I finally mentioned needing to see a specialist about the intensifying abdominal pain, he dismissed it as unnecessary expense. These doctors just want to run expensive tests to make money off worried patients. Take some antacids and get better sleep. You're probably just eating too much fast food because you don't cook proper meals. By April, I was using sick days regularly, something I'd never done before in my teaching career. The pain wasn't just in my stomach anymore. It was radiating to my back, making it difficult to stand for long periods or maintain the energy levels necessary for managing a classroom full of third graders. My students began noticing my discomfort. "Miss Thompson, you look really tired today," 8-year-old Marcus Rodriguez observed during morning circle time. "Do you need to sit down more often?" These children were showing more concern for my well-being than my own family members, who were too busy planning Tyler's social debut into Denver's elite society to notice that their daughter was becoming increasingly ill. I finally made an appointment with my primary care physician, Dr. Helen Rodriguez at Aurora Family Medicine, in early May. I didn't tell my parents about the appointment because they were deep in final wedding preparations, arguing about whether the champagne selection was impressive enough for the Ashworth family's expectations, and whether the band had sufficient credentials to perform for guests who attended galas at the Denver Symphony Orchestra. Dr. Rodriguez took my symptoms seriously from the moment I described them. The combination of abdominal pain, back discomfort, and digestive issues raised immediate red flags that required further investigation. She ordered blood tests, a comprehensive metabolic panel, and referred me to a gastroenterologist for specialized evaluation. "Claudia, these symptoms could indicate several different conditions, some of which require prompt treatment," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "I want you to see Dr. Jennifer Patterson at Colorado Digestive Health as soon as possible." The appointment with Dr. Patterson happened the following week, just 10 days before Tyler's wedding. The gastroenterologist ordered additional tests, including an ultrasound and CT scan that revealed the severity of my condition. My gallbladder was severely inflamed, and signs of infection were clearly visible on the imaging studies. "This is acute cholangitis," Dr. Patterson explained, showing me the concerning areas on the computer screen. "The infection is advancing rapidly, and you need immediate surgical intervention. I'm referring you to Dr. Amanda Rodriguez at Mercy General for emergency gallbladder removal." The consultation with Dr. Rodriguez happened on Monday, 2 days before Tyler's rehearsal dinner. The surgery recommendation came Tuesday morning, and Tuesday evening, I made the phone calls that revealed exactly where I ranked in my family's priorities. But as I lay in that hospital bed Wednesday night after those devastating conversations, I started remembering other patterns, other moments, when my needs had been considered secondary to Tyler's comfort or my parents' social aspirations. The dynamics had been established for decades. I had just been too willing to make excuses and maintain family harmony to recognize the systematic nature of their neglect. Like when I was 24 and caught pneumonia that required a week off work without pay. Tyler was house hunting that same week, so Mom was too busy helping him evaluate properties and negotiate with sellers to come take care of me. My friend Rachel drove down from Boulder to bring me soup and medicine. Or when I was 26 and finally saved enough money for a real vacation, my first trip anywhere in 3 years, Tyler and Victoria hit a rough patch in their relationship that same weekend. Our parents spent the entire time I was gone providing emotional support and relationship counseling. When I returned with photos from my first visit to the Pacific Ocean, no one asked about my experience because they were too busy processing Tyler's romantic crisis. Every single time, Tyler's wants had trumped my genuine needs. Every celebration of mine had been minimized while his achievements were magnified and discussed endlessly. Every milestone in my life had been treated as pleasant background noise, while his milestones became family celebrations that required everyone's attention and participation. The gallbladder infection wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the final, most dramatic example of a lifelong pattern, where my well-being would always be sacrificed for Tyler's happiness and my parents' social advancement. But this time was different. This time, their choice to prioritize his wedding over my surgery wasn't just emotionally devastating. This time, their decision could kill me. And this time, there would be witnesses to their abandonment. Medical professionals who understood the stakes. Legal documentation of their choice to risk their daughter's life for a social event. A paper trail that would eventually prove more significant than any of us could have imagined. Friday morning, I would have surgery to save my life. Saturday afternoon, they would celebrate Tyler and Victoria's union with money they'd spent without regard for anyone else's financial security. And someday soon, we would all discover that some family secrets have a way of revealing themselves at the most unexpected moments. Thursday morning brought developments that would forever change how I understood my family's priorities. I was lying in my hospital bed, the IV drip delivering antibiotics that Dr. Rodriguez hoped would stabilize my condition until Friday's surgery, when my phone buzzed with a text message from my cousin Jennifer Thompson Martinez. Jennifer lived in Phoenix and worked as a pediatric nurse practitioner, but we'd maintained a close relationship despite the geographical distance. "Claudia, I just got off the phone with Aunt Patricia. She told me you're having some minor gallbladder issues, but that you're being overly dramatic about needing surgery right before Tyler's wedding. This doesn't sound right to me. Can you call me when you get a chance?" Minor gallbladder issues. That was how my mother was describing acute cholangitis to extended family members. I immediately called Jennifer, who listened with growing alarm as I explained the actual medical situation. "Claudia, what you're describing is a serious medical emergency. Cholangitis can progress to septic shock within hours if not treated properly. Your family is completely out of line suggesting you delay surgery for a social event." Jennifer's professional medical knowledge confirmed what I already knew, but desperately needed to hear from someone in my family. My condition was genuinely life-threatening, and my parents' dismissal of the urgency was medically dangerous. "What's really disturbing," Jennifer continued, "is that Aunt Patricia specifically asked me not to call you because she said you were working yourself up and didn't need family members encouraging your anxiety. She wanted me to wait until after the wedding to reach out. My mother had actively tried to prevent a medical professional in our extended family from speaking with me about my condition. She was orchestrating a family-wide information blackout to ensure no one would support my position that emergency surgery took priority over Tyler's wedding. Jennifer, there's something else. Mom and Dad keep insisting that doctors are exaggerating the urgency to make money, or that I'm somehow psychologically creating this crisis because I'm jealous of Tyler's attention." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice carried a professional gravity I'd rarely heard from her. "Claudia, what they're doing could be considered medical neglect. If they're actively discouraging you from seeking necessary emergency care, that crosses a line from family dysfunction into potential abuse territory." Medical neglect. I had never considered my family's behavior in legal terms, but Jennifer's assessment made me realize that their actions went beyond emotional manipulation. They were actively interfering with my access to life-saving medical treatment. "I'm going to give you the contact information for a patient advocate at Banner Health here in Phoenix," Jennifer said. "They have experience dealing with family interference in medical decisions. You might need professional support to navigate this situation." Thursday afternoon brought another revelation that shattered any remaining illusions about my parents' financial priorities. I was reviewing my hospital paperwork, trying to understand the billing process for Friday's surgery, when I noticed something concerning on my insurance verification form. My health insurance policy showed a recent change of beneficiary designation that I had never authorized. When I called Anthem Blue Cross to inquire about the change, the customer service representative explained that my parents had been listed, as secondary beneficiaries on my policy, with authorization to make certain administrative changes. According to their records, the beneficiary had been changed 3 weeks ago to Tyler Thompson, with Robert Thompson listed as the authorized contact for policy modifications. I never authorized any changes to my beneficiary designation, I told the representative. How was this change made without my signature? The change was processed using a power of attorney document that was faxed to our office, she explained. The document appeared to give your father legal authority to make administrative changes to your policy. I had never given my father power of attorney over my financial or medical affairs. Someone had created fraudulent documentation to gain access to my insurance policy, and they had done it just weeks before my medical emergency. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If I died during surgery, Tyler would receive my life insurance benefit instead of the children's literacy charity I had designated as my beneficiary 2 years earlier. My parents had somehow gained unauthorized access to my policy and changed it to benefit Tyler financially in the event of my death. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. They had made these changes in May, around the same time I had been complaining about increasing abdominal pain and seeking medical consultations. Had they anticipated that my health problems might become serious? Were they positioning Tyler to benefit financially if my medical condition proved fatal? I immediately called Anthem's fraud department and filed a report about the unauthorized changes to my policy. They promised to investigate and reverse any modifications that had been made without proper authorization, but the discovery left me feeling sick in ways that had nothing to do with my gallbladder infection. Thursday evening brought the most disturbing revelation of all. My friend Rachel had driven down from Boulder to visit me before the surgery, and while we were talking, she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Claudia, I ran into your mom at King Soopers yesterday, and she said the strangest thing. She was buying groceries for some kind of reception, and when I asked about your health, she said you were taking some time to think about family priorities and that you might not be at Tyler's wedding because you were going through a selfish phase. My mother was telling people that my absence from Tyler's wedding would be due to selfishness, not life-threatening illness requiring emergency surgery. She also mentioned that Tyler and Victoria might have some exciting news to announce at the wedding, something about expanding their family soon. She seemed really excited about the possibility of becoming a grandmother. Victoria was pregnant. That explained the additional urgency around the wedding timing and my parents' absolute refusal to consider any scheduling changes. This wasn't just Tyler's wedding. It was potentially the announcement of their first grandchild, the ultimate social trophy for my status-obsessed parents. The pieces were falling into place in ways that made me nauseous. My parents had known about Victoria's pregnancy, which meant they understood that this weekend represented multiple milestones. Tyler's marriage into Denver's elite, their own social advancement, and the prospect of a grandchild who would cement their connection to the Ashworth family fortune. Against this backdrop of social triumph, my medical emergency wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to the most important weekend of their lives. No wonder they were willing to risk my life to ensure nothing interfered with their moment of glory. Friday morning arrived with a mixture of terror and resolution. As the surgical team prepped me for the operating room, I felt strangely calm despite facing major abdominal surgery without any family support. Dr. Rodriguez had assured me that the procedure had a high success rate, and her confidence helped ease my anxiety about the medical aspects of what lay ahead. What I couldn't predict was how profoundly this experience would change my understanding of family loyalty and the price of unconditional love. Claudia, you're incredibly brave for prioritizing your health, Nurse Kim said as they wheeled me toward the surgical suite. Not everyone would have the strength to make this choice when facing family pressure. Brave. No one in my family had ever used that word to describe me. For years, I had been the accommodating daughter, the one who bent her needs to fit everyone else's convenience, the one who made excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable. But lying on that surgical gurney, About to undergo life-saving surgery while my family celebrated Tyler's wedding 40 miles away, I realized something profound. I wasn't being brave. I was simply choosing to live. The anesthesia took effect as I thought about what would happen after I recovered. Would my family apologize for prioritizing a party over my health? Would they acknowledge that their behavior had been unconscionable? Or would they find ways to blame me for creating drama during their most important social moment? I suspected the latter. But for the first time in my adult life, I didn't care about earning their approval. I had chosen survival over their expectations, and that choice felt like the first truly independent decision I had ever made. The surgery took 4 hours instead of the projected 2. When I woke up in the recovery room Saturday evening, Dr. Rodriguez was sitting beside my bed with an expression of concern that immediately caught my attention. "Claudia, the surgery went well, and we removed your gallbladder successfully. But I need you to know that your condition was much more advanced than our imaging had indicated. You had developed gallstone pancreatitis in addition to the cholangitis, and there were signs of early organ involvement." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If you had delayed this surgery even another day, you would likely have gone into septic shock. The infection was hours away from becoming systemically life-threatening. Hours away from septic shock." While my family was dancing at Tyler's reception, toasting his marriage and Victoria's pregnancy, I had been closer to dying than any of us had realized. "Dr. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something. My family kept insisting that doctors exaggerate urgency to make money, or that this wasn't really an emergency. Is there any scenario where waiting would have been medically acceptable?" Her expression hardened in a way I had never seen from a medical professional. "Claudia, there is no legitimate medical opinion that would have supported delaying your surgery. Any physician who examined your test results and imaging studies would have reached the same conclusion about urgency. What your family suggested was medically indefensible." The validation felt both satisfying and heartbreaking. My family hadn't just been wrong about medical priorities. They had been recklessly, dangerously wrong. They had been willing to gamble with my life based on their complete ignorance of medical science and their absolute prioritization of social convenience. Saturday night, alone in my hospital room while my family celebrated 40 miles away, I made a series of phone calls that would set in motion events none of us could have anticipated. My first call was to Jennifer in Phoenix, who cried with relief when I told her the surgery had been successful. My second call was to the patient advocate she had recommended, who asked detailed questions about my family's behavior and took extensive notes about their interference with my medical care. My third call was to an attorney specializing in family law and medical decision-making. I wasn't sure what legal options existed for addressing my family's behavior, but I wanted to understand my rights and protections going forward. The attorney, Margaret Stevens, listened carefully to my account of events before offering an assessment. That surprised me. "Claudia, what you've described involves several potentially serious legal issues. The unauthorized changes to your insurance beneficiary designation constitute fraud. The creation of false power of attorney documents is forgery, and identity theft, and the systematic interference with your emergency medical care could be prosecuted as reckless endangerment." Legal consequences had never occurred to me, but Margaret explained that my family's behavior had crossed lines that extended far beyond emotional manipulation. The fact that they were willing to risk your death to avoid rescheduling a social event demonstrates a level of callousness that courts take very seriously, she continued, especially when combined with evidence of financial fraud and identity theft. Sunday morning brought a development that would change everything. I was reviewing my discharge paperwork when my phone rang with a call from an unknown Denver number. "Miss Thompson? This is Detective Maria Gonzalez with the Denver Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. We've received a report regarding fraudulent changes to your insurance policy and unauthorized power of attorney documents. We need to speak with you about opening a formal investigation." An investigation had already begun. The fraud department at Anthem Blue Cross had apparently found evidence of criminal activity in the unauthorized changes to my policy, and they had referred the case to law enforcement, without any action on my part. Miss Thompson, this type of insurance fraud often involves additional financial crimes. We'd like permission to examine your other financial accounts for any unauthorized activity. As I provided Detective Gonzalez with my banking and credit card information, I realized that my family's behavior was about to be scrutinized by professionals who understood exactly how serious their actions had been. Sunday afternoon. While Tyler and Victoria were presumably opening wedding gifts and basking in their social triumph, I was providing sworn statements to police detectives about identity theft and insurance fraud. The investigation would eventually uncover financial crimes that went back months, revealing a pattern of systematic theft that made their prioritization of Tyler's wedding even more unconscionable. But on that Sunday afternoon, as I signed document after document detailing my family's betrayal, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt free. Free from the obligation to protect people who had been willing to let me die for their social advancement. Free from the burden of earning love from people who saw me as expendable. Free from a family that had never actually been a family at all. The surgery had saved my life, but the investigation that followed would save my future from people who had already proven they valued a party more than my survival. Monday morning began with a phone call that would shatter any remaining illusions I had about my family's capacity for self-reflection or accountability. I was still recovering in my hospital bed, scheduled for discharge later that day, when my mother called at 7:45 a.m. with a tone I had never heard before. "Claudia Elizabeth Thompson, what have you done?" The use of my full name, delivered in that particular icy tone, transported me back to childhood moments when I had committed some unforgivable transgression, like tracking mud through the house or accidentally breaking a decorative plate. "Good morning, Mom. I had life-saving surgery on Friday, thanks for asking. Don't get smart with me, young lady. We just got back from our honeymoon suite at the Broadmoor, and there are 2 police officers sitting in our driveway asking questions about insurance fraud and identity theft. The neighbors are watching from their windows. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation?" Our reputation. After nearly dying from a preventable medical emergency while they danced at Tyler's wedding, my mother's primary concern was neighborhood gossip about police cars in their driveway. "Mom, I didn't call the police. The insurance company discovered fraudulent changes to my policy and reported it themselves. Apparently, creating fake power of attorney documents is a serious crime." Fake? Those documents were prepared by Victoria's cousin who works at a law firm in Colorado Springs. He said you had given us authority to handle your affairs while you were dealing with your health anxiety. Health anxiety. They had convinced themselves, and apparently others, that my life-threatening infection was a psychological condition rather than a medical emergency requiring surgical intervention. I never gave anyone authority to change my insurance beneficiary or access my financial accounts, and I certainly never authorized anyone to forge my signature on legal documents. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Mom finally spoke, her voice had shifted from anger to something that sounded almost like panic. "Claudia, you need to call these officers and tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them you asked us to handle some paperwork while you were in the hospital and that you forgot about giving us permission." She wanted me to lie to police officers to protect her from the consequences of committing identity theft and insurance fraud. The audacity was breathtaking, but also revealing. Even now, faced with criminal investigation, she genuinely believed I should sacrifice my integrity to protect their social standing. "Mom, I'm not going to lie to the police about crimes you committed." "Crimes? Claudia, we're your parents. We're trying to help you organize your affairs while you were sick. That's not criminal behavior. That's family support. Family support that involved changing my life insurance beneficiary to Tyler without my knowledge or consent during a medical Emergency that could have been fatal. Support that required forging my signature and creating false legal documents. Support that prioritized their social event over my survival. If you were really trying to help me, why did you change my beneficiary to Tyler? How does that benefit me? Another long pause. We thought it would be better for the money to stay in the family rather than going to some charity. Tyler and Victoria are starting their lives together, and they'll need financial security for the baby. The baby. So, Victoria's pregnancy was confirmed, and my parents had already decided that Tyler's future family deserved my life insurance money more than the children's literacy organization I had chosen as my beneficiary. Mom, that money was designated for a cause I care about. You had no right to change that designation, especially using forged documents. Well, if you hadn't been so dramatic about needing surgery during the most important weekend of our lives, none of this would have happened. You forced us into a position where we had to make difficult decisions. I had forced them to commit identity theft by needing emergency surgery. In my mother's mind, my medical emergency had somehow compelled them to engage in criminal behavior, rather than their criminal behavior being a choice they made independently of my health crisis. Mom, the surgery saved my life. Dr. Rodriguez said I was hours away from septic shock when they operated. These doctors always exaggerate to justify their procedures. If it had really been that serious, why didn't they operate immediately when you first went to the hospital? The same circular logic that had nearly cost me my life was now being used to justify criminal activity. No amount of medical evidence would convince them that my emergency had been genuine, because accepting the reality of my condition would require acknowledging that they had been monstrously wrong. Monday afternoon brought my discharge from the hospital and my first face-to-face meeting with Detective Gonzalez. She arrived at my apartment in Aurora with a thick folder of documents and a digital recorder, her professional demeanor suggesting this was far more serious than a simple misunderstanding. Miss Thompson, I need you to understand the scope of what we've discovered. The insurance fraud is just the beginning. We've found evidence of unauthorized access to your bank accounts, forged signatures on multiple documents, and what appears to be systematic identity theft going back several months. The crimes hadn't begun with my medical emergency. They had been ongoing for much longer than I had realized. Detective Gonzalez opened her folder and began showing me evidence I had never seen before. Bank statements from my checking, accounts showing withdrawals I had never authorized, credit card applications filed in my name for accounts I had never opened, a car loan application at a Denver dealership where someone had used my financial information to co-sign for Tyler's BMW purchase. Your parents have been using your identity and financial information extensively, Detective Gonzalez explained. The total amount of unauthorized financial activity we've identified so far exceeds $18,000. $18,000. They had stolen enough money from me to pay for half of Tyler's wedding, all while I was struggling to afford basic living. Expenses on a teacher's salary. Detective Gonzalez. I had no idea the scope was this extensive. I knew something felt wrong with my finances, but I attributed my struggles to teaching salary limitations. She nodded grimly. Financial abuse within families often goes undetected for exactly that reason. Victims assume their financial difficulties are due to income limitations rather than systematic theft by family members. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. My parents hadn't just made a few questionable financial decisions. They had engaged in a sophisticated long-term campaign of identity theft and financial fraud that had funded Tyler's lifestyle while leaving me financially vulnerable. The timing of the insurance beneficiary change is particularly concerning, Detective Gonzalez continued. Making that change just weeks before your medical emergency, especially given the severity of your condition, suggests they may have anticipated that your health problems could become life-threatening. The implication was chilling. Had my parents suspected that my worsening health could result in my death and positioned Tyler to benefit financially from that outcome? The timeline suggested a level of premeditation that went beyond opportunistic fraud. Tuesday morning brought the first sign that my family's perfect social weekend was beginning to unravel in ways they hadn't anticipated. Rachel called me with news that she had gathered from mutual friends and social media. Claudia, Tyler, and Victoria's wedding announcement in the Denver Post has been removed from their online archive. Apparently, there were some technical issues with the publication, but people are saying the Ashworth family requested the removal. The wedding announcement removal was just the beginning. By Tuesday afternoon, I had received calls from 3 different people who had attended the wedding, all asking questions that my family apparently couldn't or wouldn't answer satisfactorily. Claudia, this is Janet Morrison from your mom's book club. I was at Tyler's wedding on Saturday, and your parents told everyone you were dealing with some personal issues and couldn't attend. But then I heard from someone else that you were in the hospital having emergency surgery. Is everything okay? Janet's call revealed that my parents had been spreading multiple conflicting stories about my absence from the wedding. To some guests, I was dealing with personal issues. To others, I was going through a selfish phase. To still others, I was having minor medical procedures that I was exaggerating for attention. The inconsistency in their explanations was creating confusion and suspicion among people who had known our family for years. When you tell different lies to different people about the same event, eventually those lies collide in ways that expose the deception. Wednesday brought the development I had been dreading, but somehow knew was inevitable. Tyler called me for the first time since our devastating conversation the week before, but his tone was entirely different from his previous dismissiveness. Claudia, we need to talk. The police want to interview me about some financial matters, and Victoria's family is asking questions I can't answer. Victoria's family. The Ashworth dynasty that my parents had been so desperate to impress was now questioning the Thompson family's integrity based on emerging evidence of criminal behavior. What kind of questions are they asking, Tyler? They want to know why there are discrepancies in your insurance policies, and whether our family has been involved in any fraudulent financial activities. Richard Ashworth is concerned about protecting his family's reputation from any potential legal complications. The very reputation my parents had sacrificed my health to cultivate was now in jeopardy because of the crimes they had committed to fund Tyler's wedding. The social advancement they had prioritized over my life was crumbling because their criminal behavior was becoming public knowledge. Tyler, did you know that Mom and Dad changed my life insurance beneficiary to you without my permission? The pause that followed was longer than any silence in our previous conversations. When Tyler finally responded, his voice sounded genuinely confused. What are you talking about? I never asked them to do anything with your insurance. They forged documents giving Dad power of attorney over my financial affairs, then used that fraudulent authority to change my beneficiary designation. If I had died during surgery, you would have received my life insurance money instead of the charity I had designated. Claudia, I had no idea about any insurance changes. Mom just told me that you were being dramatic about some gallbladder problems, and that you were trying to ruin my wedding because you were jealous of the attention. For the first time in our adult relationship, Tyler sounded like he was genuinely listening to what I was saying, rather than dismissing my concerns automatically. Tyler, I nearly died during that surgery. Dr. Rodriguez said I was hours away from septic shock when they operated. This wasn't drama or jealousy. This was a genuine medical emergency that could have killed me. Another long pause. Claudia, if that's true, then why did Mom and Dad keep saying you were exaggerating everything? Because accepting that my medical emergency was real would have required them to admit they prioritized your wedding over my life. It was easier to convince themselves I was lying than to acknowledge they had made an unconscionable choice. Wednesday evening brought a phone call that changed Tyler's understanding of our family dynamics in ways I never could have predicted. Victoria had apparently done her own research into the criminal charges being filed against our parents, and what she discovered had serious implications for Tyler's future with the Ashworth family. Claudia, Victoria found out that identity theft and insurance fraud are felony charges that can result in prison sentences. Her father is concerned about the family's association with people who might be convicted criminals. The Ashworth family was distancing themselves from the Thompsons. The social elevation my parents had sacrificed my health to achieve was evaporating because their crimes had become too public and too serious to ignore. Victoria's also asking questions about the wedding expenses and whether any of the money came from fraudulent sources. If they used stolen money to pay for wedding vendors, those transactions could be evidence in the criminal case. Tyler was beginning to understand that the lavish wedding he had enjoyed might have been funded partially with money stolen from me. The celebration of his new life was built on criminal proceeds taken from his sister's accounts while she struggled financially. Tyler, the police showed me evidence that Mom and Dad have been stealing from me for months. The total amount is over $18,000. That's money I could have used for better medical care, for financial security, for the life I was trying to build as a teacher. $18,000? Claudia, I had no idea. They told me you were contributing to wedding expenses because you wanted to help make my day special. Contributing. They had rewritten theft as generosity, fraud as family cooperation. Tyler had genuinely believed that I was voluntarily helping to fund his wedding, when in reality they were stealing money from my accounts to pay for his celebration. Thursday morning brought the arraignment hearing that would make my family's legal troubles a matter of public record. I chose not to attend, but Detective Gonzalez called me that afternoon with an update that confirmed my worst fears about how far my parents were willing to go to avoid accountability. Miss Thompson, your parents have pleaded not guilty to all charges and are claiming that you gave them verbal permission to handle your financial affairs. Their attorney is arguing that this is a family misunderstanding rather than criminal fraud. They were going to fight the charges by claiming I had authorized their actions, which meant the case would go to trial and all the details of their behavior would become public testimony. The family dysfunction that had nearly cost me my life was going to be examined in open court. Their attorney also indicated they planned to argue that your medical condition was not as serious as you claimed, and that you're exaggerating the urgency to make their behavior appear more callous than it actually was. Even facing felony charges, they were still maintaining that my medical emergency had been fictional or exaggerated. They would rather be convicted of crimes than admit they had been willing to risk their daughter's life for a social event. Thursday. Evening brought a conversation with Tyler that revealed just how completely the family I had known was disintegrating. He called me from his downtown apartment, and for the first time in our adult lives, he sounded genuinely remorseful. Claudia, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realize I was completely wrong. Victoria and I have been talking, and she made me understand how serious your surgery was and how awful our family's behavior has been. Victoria, ironically, had been the one to help Tyler understand the severity of what had happened. The woman whose wedding had been prioritized over my life was now the person helping my brother recognize the moral bankruptcy of our parents' choices. I want you to know that I never asked them to steal money from you or change your insurance policies. I thought they were just really excited about the wedding and maybe being a little over the top with the planning. Tyler, did you ever wonder how they could afford a $45,000 wedding on Dad's insurance salary and Mom's part-time real estate work? The question hung in the air between us. Tyler was beginning to understand that the lavish celebration of his marriage had been funded through criminal activity that had victimized his own sister. Claudia, I don't know how to make this right. Victoria's family is questioning whether our marriage can survive this scandal, and honestly, I don't know if I can live with the knowledge that my wedding might have cost you your life. The social triumph that had been more important than my survival was destroying the very relationships it was supposed to enhance. Tyler's marriage was in jeopardy because of the crimes committed to make his wedding possible. Friday morning brought the news that would change everything about how this story would end. I was reviewing medical bills in my apartment when my phone rang with a call from an attorney I had never heard of. Miss Thompson, this is David Wellington from Wellington, Hayes and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Eleanor Thompson, your paternal grandmother. I understand there have been some recent legal complications in your family, and I need to discuss some matters that may be relevant to the criminal case against your parents. Grandmother Eleanor had died 8 months ago, but I had been told that her modest estate had already been distributed according to her will. What could possibly be relevant to the current criminal charges? Mr. Wellington, I'm not sure I understand. My parents told me that grandmother's estate was very small and had been handled through probate months ago. Miss Thompson, I think you need to come to my office immediately. There are some things about your grandmother's will that your family apparently never shared with you. Things that are going to change your understanding of their financial situation and their motivations for the crimes they committed. The will reading that would reveal my family's deepest secrets was scheduled for Monday morning. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family's financial struggles and their desperate social climbing was about to be revealed as an elaborate deception. The surgery had saved my life, but the will reading would save my future from people who had been lying to me about far more than just medical priorities. Monday morning arrived with a sense of impending revelation that made my surgical recovery seem insignificant by comparison. I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room at Wellington, Hayes and Associates, surrounded by leather-bound law books and oil paintings of distinguished Colorado attorneys from decades past. Across from me sat David Wellington, a silver-haired estate attorney in his 60s, with a manila folder thick enough to suggest that my grandmother's modest estate was far more complicated than my family had led me to believe. Miss Thompson, before we begin, I need to ask you directly. What did your parents tell you about your grandmother Eleanor's will and estate distribution? I recounted the brief conversation I'd had with my parents 8 months ago, shortly after grandmother Eleanor's funeral. They had explained that her estate was small, consisting primarily of her modest house in Lakewood and some minimal savings. They told me the house had been sold to pay for funeral expenses and outstanding debts, with any remaining money distributed according to her wishes. They said the estate was barely worth $30,000 after all expenses, and that most of it went to cover her medical bills from her final illness. They mentioned that she had left small keepsakes to Tyler and me, but nothing of significant financial value. David Wellington's expression grew increasingly grim as I spoke. When I finished, he opened the manila folder and withdrew a document that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation. Miss Thompson, your grandmother's estate was valued at $1.2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $1.2 million. My grandmother, who had lived in a modest ranch house and drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, had been a millionaire. The bulk of the estate consists of mineral rights to property in Weld County that your grandfather purchased in 1967, long before the fracking boom made those rights extraordinarily valuable. Your grandmother also owned substantial stock portfolios and certificates of deposit that she had accumulated over decades of careful investing. Wellington spread additional documents across the conference table, each one revealing assets I had never known existed. Oil and gas royalties that generated monthly income, blue-chip stocks that had appreciated dramatically over the years, treasury, bonds and savings accounts scattered across multiple financial institutions. But here's what's most relevant to your current legal situation, Miss Thompson. According to your grandmother's will, 60% of her estate was designated to go to you, with 30% going to your brother Tyler and 10% going to your parents as the executors. 60% of $1.2 million. I was supposed to inherit $720,000 more than 17 years of my teaching salary combined. Money that would have eliminated my student loans, allowed me to buy a house, provided financial security I had never dreamed possible. Where is that money now, Mr. Wellington? His pause told me everything I needed to know before he spoke the words aloud. Your parents, as the executors of the estate, have been systematically liquidating assets and transferring the proceeds into accounts they control. They've been using your inheritance to fund their lifestyle and your brother's wedding expenses. They had stolen my inheritance. The money that was legally mine, that grandmother Eleanor had specifically designated for my future, had been embezzled by the people entrusted to distribute it according to her wishes. Miss Thompson, there's something else you need to understand. Your grandmother specifically modified her will 6 months before her death, after she became aware of your parents' financial struggles and their treatment of you. Wellington withdrew. Another document, this one handwritten in my grandmother's distinctive script. It was a letter addressed to me, dated just 4 months before her death. My dearest Claudia, the letter began, I am writing this because I fear your parents may never share the contents of my will with you honestly. I have watched for years as they favored Tyler while treating you as an afterthought, and I refuse to allow that pattern to continue after my death. I had to pause in reading as tears blurred my vision. Grandmother Eleanor had seen the family dynamics that I thought I had successfully hidden from everyone. I am leaving the majority of my estate to you because you are the grandchild who has shown genuine kindness and care throughout my life. You visited me regularly, called to check on my health, and treated me as a person rather than an obligation. Your parents and Tyler only showed interest in my welfare when they needed something. The letter continued for 2 pages, detailing specific instances where I had demonstrated care and compassion that my parents and Tyler had failed to show. She remembered the Saturday afternoons I had spent helping her with grocery shopping and household tasks. She recalled the times I had taken her to medical appointments when my parents were too busy with Tyler's activities. I have instructed my attorney to ensure that you receive this letter if there are any irregularities in the estate distribution. If you are reading this, it means your parents have likely attempted to steal your inheritance, just as they have stolen your dignity and recognition throughout your childhood. The final paragraph contained instructions that would change everything about my ability to seek justice for the crimes committed against me. Claudia, I have also left detailed financial records documenting every instance where your parents asked me for money over the past 5 years. The loans they claimed were temporary have never been repaid, totaling over $45,000. This money was taken under false pretenses, with promises of repayment that were never honored. I want you to have this evidence because I suspect their financial deception extends far beyond what they have stolen from me. $45,000 in unpaid loans from my grandmother, on top of the $720,000 inheritance they had embezzled. My parents had been systematically stealing from both my grandmother and me, while presenting themselves as financially struggling, middle-class suburbanites. Mr. Wellington, why wasn't I contacted when the estate went through probate? Why wasn't I informed about the will reading? His expression darkened further. According to Colorado probate law, all beneficiaries must be notified of estate proceedings. Your parents filed documents with the probate court stating that you were estranged from the family and could not be located for notification purposes. Estranged and unable to be located. While I was living 20 minutes from their house, teaching, at a public school with easily accessible employment records, maintaining regular contact with extended family members. They had perjured themselves in probate court to prevent me from learning about my inheritance. The documents they filed claimed, you had moved out of state and cut off all family contact after a dispute over your grandmother's care during her final illness. They presented themselves as the only family members available to handle estate administration. The systematic nature of their deception was staggering. They had planned and executed a comprehensive fraud that involved multiple felonies: estate, theft, perjury, filing false documents with the court, and embezzling assets they were legally obligated to distribute according to the will. Mr. Wellington, what legal remedies do I have for recovering my inheritance? Miss Thompson, what your parents have done constitutes multiple serious felonies under Colorado law. Estate theft of this magnitude carries penalties of 10 to 20 years in prison and mandatory restitution of all stolen assets plus punitive damages. 20 years in prison. The social climbing aspirations that had led them to risk my life for Tyler's wedding could now cost them decades of their freedom. But there's something else you should know. The timing of their estate theft coincides exactly with the period when they were also stealing from your personal accounts. This suggests a pattern of systematic financial abuse that will be very compelling to prosecutors and juries. Wellington spread out a timeline he had prepared, showing the correlation between my grandmother's estate liquidation and the unauthorized withdrawals from my bank accounts. The crimes weren't separate incidents. They were part of a coordinated campaign of financial abuse that had funded their lifestyle while leaving both my grandmother's wishes unfulfilled and my own financial security destroyed. Miss Thompson, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know that your parents used portions of your inheritance to pay for your brother's wedding? The question hit me like a revelation that connected every piece of the puzzle. The $45,000 wedding that my parents claimed had stretched their finances to the breaking point had been funded with money that legally belonged to me. They had stolen my inheritance to pay for the social event they had prioritized over my medical emergency. They used my own money to fund the wedding they considered more important than my life. That's correct. And that creates a level of callousness that prosecutors find particularly compelling when presenting cases to juries. They didn't just steal your inheritance, they used it to fund an event that they prioritized over preventing your potential death. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. The wedding that had been more important than my survival had been paid for with money stolen from the person whose survival they had been willing to sacrifice. Mr. Wellington, I want to pursue every legal remedy available. I want my parents prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and I want every penny of my inheritance recovered with maximum penalties. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I had never experienced in relation to my family: the desire for complete and total justice. Not reconciliation, not understanding, not family harmony. Justice. Miss Thompson, pursuing. This aggressively will likely result in your parents spending the rest of their lives in prison. Are you prepared for that level of consequence? Mr. Wellington, they were prepared for me to die rather than reschedule a party. I'm prepared for them to face the consequences of their choices. Monday afternoon brought a meeting with Detective Gonzalez that would expand the criminal case beyond anything we had previously imagined. When I presented her with the evidence from my grandmother's estate, her reaction was immediate and decisive. Miss Thompson, this changes everything. We're no longer dealing with simple identity theft and insurance fraud. This is organized criminal activity involving estate theft, perjury, and systematic financial abuse spanning multiple years. The detective immediately contacted the Colorado Attorney General's office, which specialized in complex financial crimes involving elderly victims and estate fraud. Within hours, I was sitting in a conference room with prosecutors who handled white-collar criminal cases that routinely resulted in decades-long prison sentences. Miss Thompson, your parents have committed what we classify as aggravated financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, combined with organized theft and perjury, explained Assistant Attorney General Sarah Martinez. These are the kinds of cases that make examples for other potential offenders. Making examples. My parents, who had spent their lives desperately trying to impress other people with their social connections and family success, were about to become public examples of criminal behavior that would be referenced in legal proceedings for years to come. The fact that they used stolen inheritance money to fund a wedding they prioritized over your medical emergency creates a narrative that juries find particularly compelling. It demonstrates a level of moral bankruptcy that prosecutors dream of presenting to judges. Tuesday brought the first sign that my pursuit of justice was already having consequences my parents hadn't anticipated. Tyler called me with news that Victoria's family had not only distanced themselves from the criminal charges, but had actually hired their own attorney to investigate whether they could be held liable for receiving stolen money as wedding gifts. Claudia, The Ashworth family is terrified that they could be charged as accessories to financial crimes. They're demanding that I provide documentation showing the source of every dollar spent on our wedding. The social elevation my parents had sacrificed everything to achieve was now threatening to destroy the very relationships it was supposed to create. The Ashworth family, faced with potential legal liability, was treating Tyler as a criminal, accomplice rather than a cherished son-in-law. Victoria's father wants me to sign a sworn affidavit stating that I had no knowledge of any criminal activity related to the wedding funding. But Claudia, I can't sign that document honestly now that I know where the money came from. Tyler was being forced to choose between perjuring himself to protect the Ashworth relationship or telling the truth and acknowledging his indirect complicity in crimes committed against his own sister. Victoria's talking about annulment. She says her family can't be associated with criminal activity and that our marriage was based on false pretenses since the wedding was funded with stolen money. The marriage that had been more important than my life was disintegrating because it had been built on criminal proceeds. Tyler's social triumph was collapsing exactly as my parents had been, and for exactly the same reasons. Claudia, I know, I have no right to ask this, but is there any way you would consider reducing the charges against Mom and Dad? Victoria's family might reconsider if the legal issues could be resolved quietly. Tyler was being forced to choose between protecting our parents and protecting himself from potential criminal liability as an accessory to their crimes. The family loyalty that had excluded me for years was crumbling under legal pressure. Claudia, I need to ask you something. If I testify against Mom and Dad, will you consider asking the prosecutors to give me immunity from charges related to the wedding? He wanted me to help him avoid consequences for benefiting from crimes committed against me. Even facing the destruction of his marriage and career, Tyler still believed I should sacrifice my interest to protect him from accountability. Tyler, you enjoyed a $45,000 wedding funded with money stolen from me while I was struggling to pay for basic medical care. Why should I help you avoid consequences for that? Because I didn't know where the money came from. I thought Mom and Dad were just being generous and maybe taking out loans to make my wedding special. Tyler, did you ever wonder how they could afford such generosity when they had spent years telling me they couldn't help with my student loans or medical expenses? The question hung between us. Tyler had never questioned the source of his parents' sudden financial generosity because it had benefited him directly. He had been willfully blind to obvious inconsistencies because acknowledging them would have required giving up advantages he didn't want to lose. I was focused on starting my life with Victoria. I wasn't thinking about family financial logistics. Tyler, you're 30 years old with a business degree and experience in commercial real estate. You understood financial logistics perfectly well when they benefited you. Saturday brought the news that would ensure my parents' downfall became a cautionary tale told throughout Colorado's legal and social communities for years to come. The Denver Post had obtained details about the case and was planning a front-page Sunday exposé about the family who had stolen over $1 million to fund a wedding they prioritized over their daughter's life-saving surgery. Family sacrifices. Daughter's life for son's social status. The Colorado inheritance theft case that shocked prosecutors. The headline would ensure that everyone in my parents' social circle, everyone they had tried to impress, everyone whose approval they had desperately sought, would know exactly what kind of people Robert and Patricia Thompson really were. The article included quotes from prosecutors describing the case as one of the most callous examples of family financial abuse they had ever encountered. It detailed the timeline of their crimes, the systematic nature of their theft, and the documented evidence of their willingness to risk my death rather than reschedule Tyler's wedding. Sunday morning brought reactions that exceeded my most satisfying fantasies of justice. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with calls from neighbors, former classmates, and family friends who had read the newspaper article and wanted to express their shock and support. Claudia, this is Margaret Henderson from your parents' church. I just read the article in the Denver Post, And I want you to know that the entire congregation is appalled by what Robert and Patricia did to you. We've voted to remove them from membership and to pray for your recovery and healing. Removed from church membership. The social standing my parents had cultivated through decades of attendance at Westside Methodist was being stripped away by people who were disgusted by their criminal behavior. We're also taking up a special collection to help you with medical expenses and legal costs. The congregation feels responsible for not seeing the signs of abuse earlier. Similar calls came. Throughout the day, the country club had revoked my parents' membership. The real estate office had fired my mother. Dad's insurance company had terminated his employment and was cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. Every social connection they had built, every relationship they had cultivated, every aspiration they had harbored was being destroyed by their own documented criminal behavior. But the most satisfying call came Sunday afternoon from Victoria Ashworth herself. "Miss Thompson, this is Victoria. I wanted to call you personally to apologize for my family's role in what happened to you. If we had known that Tyler's wedding was funded with money stolen from you, we would never have allowed the ceremony to proceed." Victoria's voice carried genuine remorse, but also something else that made me smile for the first time since this nightmare began. "I also want you to know that my family is prepared to testify in the criminal trial about conversations we had with your parents regarding the wedding expenses. They made several statements about your financial contributions that we now realize were lies designed to cover up their theft. The Ashworth family was going to testify against my parents. The social elite my parents had been so desperate to impress were going to help send them to prison for the crimes they had committed to gain their approval. Miss Thompson, Tyler has asked me to tell you that he's prepared to cooperate fully with the prosecution and provide whatever testimony might help ensure your parents face appropriate consequences for what they did to you. Tyler had chosen to protect himself over protecting our parents. The family loyalty that had excluded me was crumbling exactly as it should have, with everyone abandoning the people who had proven themselves willing to sacrifice their own daughters' life for social advancement. Monday morning brought the final piece of evidence that would ensure my parents spent the rest of their lives in prison. Wellington called me with news that my grandmother's attorney had found additional documentation that proved my parents had been stealing from her for over 5 years, not just the months following her death. Your grandmother kept detailed records of every financial request your parents made, including recordings of phone conversations where they promised to repay loans they never intended to honor. She suspected their theft was systematic and documented everything for potential legal action. My grandmother had been building a criminal case against my parents before her death, gathering evidence of their financial abuse that would now be used to ensure maximum sentences for their crimes. Miss Thompson, your grandmother's recordings include conversations where your parents discussed using her money to pay for Tyler's wedding expenses, including specific statements about taking the money regardless of her wishes, because she would never know the difference. They had planned to steal from their own elderly mother to fund Tyler's wedding. The systematic nature of their criminal behavior extended to the most vulnerable member of our family, proving that no one was safe from their willingness to victimize others for social advancement. The trial was scheduled for January, but the outcome was already certain. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were cooperating, and the prosecutors were seeking maximum penalties for crimes that had shocked even experienced law enforcement professionals. My parents would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Tyler's social triumph had been erased completely, and I had discovered that sometimes the greatest victory isn't forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes the greatest victory is ensuring that people who were willing to sacrifice your life face consequences severe enough that they never hurt anyone again. 1 year later, I stood in the courthouse lobby watching my parents being led away in handcuffs after receiving their sentencing, 32 years each in the Colorado State Penitentiary. The judge had called their crimes a breathtaking betrayal of family trust, and noted that their willingness to risk their daughter's life for social advancement represented moral bankruptcy demanding the harshest punishment. At ages 63 and 61, Robert and Patricia Thompson would likely die in prison. Their social climbing had ended with them becoming cautionary tales in legal textbooks about family financial abuse. The trial lasted 6 weeks and revealed shocking depths of dysfunction. My mother's journals, read in open court, contained entries demonstrating systematic viewing of me as expendable while treating Tyler as the family's prize asset. If something happened to Claudia, at least we'd still have our successful son to be proud of. One entry read from 2 years before my surgery. The prosecution called 47 witnesses, including elderly victims of Dad's insurance fraud, medical professionals who testified about my condition's severity, and financial experts who traced stolen inheritance money through every wedding expense. Tyler testified against our parents, describing conversations where they discussed using Claudia's money for wedding costs, while dismissing my emergency as attention-seeking drama. The jury deliberated 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 38 felony counts. The forewoman told reporters my mother's journals made their decision easy. Anyone documenting willingness to let their daughter die for a social event deserved maximum punishment. But as I watched my parents shuffle away in orange jumpsuits, I felt unexpected closure rather than revenge. The people who sacrificed my life for a party finally faced proportionate consequences. The financial recovery exceeded even my attorney's projections. Beyond reclaiming my $720,000 inheritance, civil asset forfeiture recovered everything purchased, with stolen money, including full wedding expenses. Punitive damages brought my total settlement to $1.4 million, more money than I had ever imagined possessing. I used those funds to transform not just my life, but the lives of others facing similar abuse. The Claudia Thompson Foundation for Family Financial Abuse became Colorado's leading resource for victims of systematic theft by relatives, providing legal support, counseling services, and emergency financial assistance. My teaching career evolved into something far more meaningful. The University of Colorado hired me to develop curriculum for their social work program on identifying family financial exploitation. My textbook, When Family Steals, Recognizing and Surviving Financial Abuse by Relatives, became required reading in programs nationwide. The speaking engagements began 6 months after the trial concluded. Standing before audiences of attorneys, social workers, and abuse survivors, I told my story not as a victim, but as someone who had transformed trauma into advocacy. My family taught me that love shouldn't be conditional on your usefulness to someone else's agenda, I would say during keynote addresses. Real family supports your survival, not your sacrifice. Those speeches reached millions through social media and news coverage, generating thousands of emails from people recognizing similar patterns in their own families. My phone became a lifeline for survivors discovering they weren't alone in facing systematic theft and manipulation by relatives who claimed to love them. The personal transformation was equally profound. I met David Chen, ironically the brother of Dr. Rodriguez who had saved my life, at a medical ethics conference where I was speaking about family interference in emergency care. David worked as a forensic accountant specializing in family financial crimes, and our shared understanding of systematic abuse created an immediate connection. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, foreign concepts, after years of family dynamics where my needs were always secondary. When David proposed 8 months later, he presented me with a ring purchased entirely with his own money, a gesture that moved me to tears for reasons he perfectly understood. Our wedding was intimate and authentic. 30 guests at a mountain lodge, focused on celebrating love rather than impressing people we barely knew. The contrast with Tyler's elaborate stolen money spectacle couldn't have been more stark or satisfying. Tyler's life had taken a predictably different trajectory. Victoria's annulment was finalized within 6 months, and the Ashworth family's complete social exile left him unemployable in Denver's commercial real estate market. He moved to Phoenix, where Jennifer helped him find work at a small accounting firm that didn't conduct extensive background checks. During rare phone conversations, Tyler expressed what he claimed was remorse for his role in the family's dysfunction. But his apologies always included justifications about not understanding the source of wedding funding or being manipulated by our parents' deceptions. "I never meant for you to get hurt, Claudia. I was just trying to build a life with Victoria, and didn't ask enough questions about how Mom and Dad could afford such generous support." His continued inability to acknowledge that he had actively chosen to dismiss my medical emergency in favor of protecting his social event revealed that Tyler had learned very little from consequences that destroyed his marriage and career. Maintained minimal contact, primarily through Jennifer, who reported that Tyler seemed genuinely changed by losing everything he had valued. But change motivated by consequences rather than genuine empathy wasn't something I felt obligated to reward with renewed relationship. The extended family dynamics had shifted dramatically in my favor. Grandmother Eleanor's letter, introduced as evidence during the trial, had revealed decades of favoritism and neglect that other relatives hadn't fully recognized. Cousins, aunts, and uncles, who had previously treated me as the family's unremarkable member, began reaching out with invitations and support. "Claudia, we had no idea how badly Robert and Patricia were treating you," my Uncle Mark said during a family barbecue that summer. Eleanor's letter opened our eyes to patterns we should have seen years ago. The rehabilitation of my reputation within extended family circles felt validating, though I had learned not to depend on others' approval for my sense of self-worth. The years of being dismissed and minimized had taught me to trust my own judgment about what mattered and what deserved my energy. My health had recovered completely from the surgery, with no lasting complications from the infection that nearly killed me. Regular checkups with Dr. Rodriguez confirmed that catching the cholangitis when we did had prevented permanent organ damage that delay might have caused. "You made exactly the right choice prioritizing surgery over family pressure," Dr. Rodriguez told me during my one-year follow-up appointment. "Medical emergencies don't accommodate social calendars, and anyone suggesting otherwise doesn't understand the stakes involved." The foundation work had grown beyond anything I initially envisioned. By the end of my first year of advocacy, we had helped recover over $2.3 million in stolen assets for abuse victims and provided legal support for 47 successful prosecutions of family financial crimes. The ripple effects extended into policy changes that would protect future victims. Colorado passed legislation specifically criminalizing family financial abuse, with enhanced penalties for crimes that interfered with victims' access to emergency medical care. The law was informally known as Claudia's Law among legal professionals who had followed my case. Standing in my home office 18 months after my surgery, surrounded by thank you letters from abuse survivors and legal awards recognizing my advocacy work, I reflected on the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The family that had been willing to sacrifice my survival had inadvertently given me purpose and platform I never would have discovered otherwise. The people who had seen me as expendable had ultimately made me indispensable to a community of survivors who needed someone who understood their experience intimately. Their betrayal had become my calling, their cruelty had generated my compassion, and their crimes had funded my ability to help others escape similar abuse. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are when the stakes are highest. My family had shown me they valued social status more than my life, and that revelation had freed me to build something infinitely better with people who proved their love through actions rather than demanding it through manipulation. The surgery had saved my life, but discovering the truth about my family had saved my future from people who would have continued exploiting my loyalty indefinitely. In the end, learning that your family is willing to let you die for their convenience isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. The worst thing would be never learning that truth and spending your entire life trying to earn love from people who see you as expendable. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss Our latest uploads.